Yes, this is John G. Sutton. Welcome to Tales from the Jails. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about a subject that is quite controversial, although it's to be expected in an all-male environment. We're talking about today institutionalized homosexuality, male rape, and the people that were actually conducting this would be people that you wouldn't expect. We're talking about people who were considered to be tough guy gangsters. They were the people who were doing it, alpha males, you see, in a rigid regime, such as strange ways. Now, as a hospital officer, it was my duty to deal with people who had been attacked, razored, stabbed, molested, beaten, and raped by other inmates. One of the inmates that was infamous as a bully in the prisons was Paul Sykes. Paul Sykes operated not on his own but with a number of like-minded individuals, and they formed themselves into a kind of bully boy clique, shall we say. And they picked on the younger prisoners, the vulnerable prisoners, and bullied them, molested them, took their cigarettes, tobacco, whatever it was they wanted from them, they took. And these people couldn't fight back. I mean, the thing is, there's a kind of code in prison. You don't grass up anybody. If you're considered to be somebody that reports wrong to the staff, or then you're going to get some serious injury. I had on a number of occasions to deal with prisoners who had been dealt with by these bully gangs. One young man came down, he was quite seriously injured actually. He'd been raped by his cellmate, and what they'd done was that they'd forcibly inserted themselves into him against his will, which caused friction, and it tore his rectum. So he had a big split right along the side of his rectum. And what they'd done was, when they'd finished with him, to ensure that there was no DNA evidence, or so they thought, they made him defecate into newspaper, which they then threw out of the cell window. That was a typical trick. Because in those days, I mean, we went back to the 1970s, there was no sanitation in the prisons. There was a 12-foot by 8-foot cell, 3 beds, because generally speaking, it was massively overcrowded. At one time, at Strangeways, when I was there, it would be around about 1979, 80, there was over 2,000 inmates in the prison. A prison that was built in the Victorian era to house 700 men had over 2,000 inmates. Beggars belief, really, when you think about it. We're talking about institutionalized homosexuality. At Wormwood Scrubs, when I was working at the Scrubs, the gangsters, you know, the armed robbers, they were definitely into this institutionalized homosexuality. I was working on C2 landing at the Scrubs, and this inmate came to me and said, I don't know why he asked me, I don't know, but he asked me how much it was for oral sex, for a blowjob, he said. I said, I don't know why you're asking me. I said, but I directed him to the wing, the landing red band. I said, go and ask one of your fellow inmates, try the red band on the landing, you probably know. I said, well, what do you really want to know for? He says, I just want to know how much it's going to cost me. The strange thing was, he didn't want to pay somebody to suck his todger, he wanted to pay somebody to suck theirs. Seriously. I mean, but you deal with these things, you know, on a daily basis, and you become almost immune to the horrible idea that people are going to be raped. The guy who had his rectum ripped, he had to go to hospital for fear of infection, of course. You know, although we had a hospital in the prison, and I worked at it, it wasn't considered to be of a standard that could deal with something as traumatic as that. So the inmate was taken out, and I believe his cellmate was charged with male rape and grievously injuring this inmate. Of course, the number of prisoners who were complaining of this were not vast. I mean, you might get one or two a month, people who were complaining that they'd been assaulted. I was on duty one day with the doctor, and an inmate came in and said he'd been suffering from pains in his bowels, you know, inside. And the doctor was a strange doctor, really seriously strange. He put these rubber gloves on, get the guy to bend over, and inserted his fingers into the guy's rectum, and the guy's bent over with the doctor's got his hand up his backside, and he's saying, the doctor says to him, "Tell me," he said, "are you actively homosexual?" And the guy's all the time, this doctor's got the old hand up the backside, and he says, "No, no, no, why?" He said, "Well, there's just a lot of room in here." Imagine that. That would traumatise you. It would nearly traumatise me, and I was a hospital officer, you know, like the nursing officer, because whenever the doctor saw an inmate, there was always a nursing officer in there in case the inmates decided to become violent, which on occasion some did, you know, if they were refused the medication that they may want, you know, Largactil or Valium or whatever it was they were on, they wanted, you see, to get them out of there. But of course, I've mentioned him before, Paul Sykes. He'd kicked up and we'd injected him, and I don't know if he'd become quite liked this or something, but he was on Largactil all the time, came down regularly, and he seemed to quite like a large dose. I'll have a double, yeah, a double Largactil, yeah. That's him, yeah. Big fella. I've heard him, I've seen him on these good posts about, what does he say? "I've been whacking screws all my life," yeah. Well, let me tell you this, and I know that people consider him to be a frightening individual, or he was. In strange ways, he wasn't. Because in strange ways, in the 1970s was what's known as a screws nick, yeah? That is, if you kicked off, all the screws would bounce on you. And the block, well, they had characters running the block. We had the school bully, the black dog, the Chinese money box. Seriously, people like this. School bully was best. He used to just go in and say, "You've got 10 seconds. And if you haven't hit me in 10 seconds, I'm going to give you the best hiding you've ever had in your life." And it didn't matter who they were. It could have been Paul Sykes or anybody. I give the school bully his due. He always had about 3 of the giant type standing behind him outside the cell. But I never saw it come unstuck, you know. I mean, I've seen a few of that. You couldn't stop it. I did stop one where they were kicking this guy up and down the landing. I ran in and grabbed hold of the guy, put him in an empty cell, and then got the hospital, the senior medical officer, to look at this guy. But I was worried that the staff would actually turn on me, which eventually they did. So there are little tales from the jails today. And the thing is, if you're find yourself in prison, try and get yourself in a single cell, because if you're in a double cell you don't know who the hell you're with. And male rape, it looked to me to be extremely painful. And of course, how do you deal with it after that? It's not just the physical side of it, it's the emotional side and the psychological side. And if you're just an average guy, you know, how are you going to fight against somebody like Paul Sykes? 6'4", 18 stone, probably be able to pick you up with one hand and hold you down, whilst with the other he removes your underclothing with one great rip. Off come the shreddies. And if he, well, I mean, he could do it on his own, but he had a team with him, whose names I will not mention because they're still alive. But believe me, I know who they are. Thank you very much for watching today's Tales from the Jails. Please subscribe if you enjoyed this. There's lots more, of course. And by the way, my book's called Psychic Screw. It's on Amazon. Thank you very much.